Alrighty, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Time Out with Doc and Caveman. As always, you are here with Dr. Fantasy and my co-host, the Fantasy Caveman. This is going to be our first installment of our team previews. So we're going to go from the bottom of the standings last year up. So today we're starting with the worst team. We'll save the best for last, which Caveman will be very excited about. So we just finished up our prospect profiles. We had the NBA draft. Free agency has been rolling. So we're going to go over last season, preview next season, and talk a little bit about what moves they've made so far this season. So today we're starting with the Houston Rockets. Going back to 2020, it was a challenging season, to be polite, for the Houston Rockets.
Why we're talking about them for...
Yeah, that might be. So, worst record in the NBA, last in the Western Conference. It was Steven Silas's first season as head coach. I don't think the expectations were very high with them losing James Harden last season and a ton of injuries, which I'll talk about. They were 23rd offensively in points per game in the league, 27th defensively, so one of the worst defensive teams in the league. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting was there was only one player on their entire team that played more than 51 games. And that guy was Jae'Sean Tate. Besides that, you had Sterling Brown play 51 games, and then a bunch of guys that only played 40 games. So they really didn't have the same roster for much of the season, which is kind of interesting to note. Jae'Sean Tate, who I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, was first team all-rookie with 11.3 points, 5.3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and 1.2 steals. And then I also wanted to note, because he's technically not a part of any of their season leaders, but Kevin Porter was very hot for them at the end of the year with 16.6 points, 3.8 rebounds, 6.3 assists in 26 games for him. So he started to show a little bit of that potential that a lot of people thought he had coming out. Their points leaders, like I said, this was a tough one because for the most part, nobody really played any games for him. Technically, Jae'Sean Tate was the only guy eligible to be a leader in anything. So technically, Jae'Sean Tate led the team in literally everything. But Victor Oladipo played 20 games for him, averaged 21.2 points. Christian Wood, I guess, would be a season leader for them as well. He played 41 games. Yeah. He averaged 21 points. And then John Wall also played 40 games for him, 20.6 points. Their rebounds leader, Christian Wood, 9.6. Assists, John Wall at 6.9. And then steals, a few guys over 1. Kelly Olynyk at 1.4. Jae'Sean Tate, as I mentioned, at 1.2. John Wall at 1.1. And then Christian Wood leading the way with blocks at 1.2. So that's their 2020 season. Caveman, what stood out to you? Anyone in particular?
I mean, they had the last place record in the league for a reason, so it was kind of hard for anybody to really stand out. But I think the biggest thing with these guys, you mentioned it with the games played, they had, and we're gonna talk about another team coming up that also had difficulties. They really struggled to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Christian Wood missed a lot. Christian Wood's arguably their best player. He missed quite a bit of time. We already know about John Wall at this point. We know what he is. He's good when he's available, but it's insanely difficult to rely on John Wall. But Jae'Sean Tate is the guy that really stands out. First of all, he was available, which is impressive enough for anybody on the Rockets last season. You mentioned how many games he actually managed to play for them. He kind of, did it all. He was kind of a do-it-all, wing player. He kind of, if I had to pick one person that really stood out and really showed some growth, I think he's gonna be big this upcoming season with all the with all their draft pieces that they added and all that. He's the one that really stands out to me. I mean, Christian Wood, I'm excited to see what Christian Wood continuing to evolve, assuming he stays healthy. He's he had a couple seasons now where he's been bitten by the injury bug a tad. So if he's able to stay healthy, if Jayshawn Tate's able to just continue to grow, and if these guys can just stay healthy, I think first of all we're talking about a much better team. Maybe not much better, but if their guys were all healthy, I'm not sure we're talking about the first team in the league. This team has quite a bit of talent. I think a good amount of it just had to do with staying healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, to me, the guy that stood out even more, and of course, Jayshawn Tate put together the most well-rounded, complete season, as you mentioned. But I think Kevin Porter really stood out to me. I mean, he ended up dropping 50 towards the end of the year, and he didn't only look good once he returned from the G League, because I mean, he was so bad he was in the G League, and a lot of people were, I don't want to say giving up on him, but there were people giving up on him, and he's only 21 years old. But he showed, I don't think only that he can be good, he showed flashes of all-star potential. And when we're talking about who's going to eventually replace John Wall, I think they already have that guy on their roster. So I'm interested to see if Kevin Porter can take another step forward this year. He's going to have more talent around him, so there shouldn't be so much of an offensive load on him. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how he gels. So speaking of the draft, we mentioned a few younger pieces they have, and they ended up with 4 first-round picks. So they picked Jalen Green, 2nd overall. One of my boys, Alperen Sengun, at 16. Another one of my boys, Usman Garuba, at 23. And then Josh Christopher, a 3-and-D kind of wing, at 24 overall. So pretty successful draft. What do you think of their draft as a whole, Caveman?
Oh, I love their draft. Started with him. I mean, obviously Jalen Green's going to get a lot of the spotlight here and recognize it, and understandably so. I think he's a great fit with all the other young pieces that they have, and I think I think he can immediately step in and probably be. You can argue that he can be the team number 2 option behind Christian Wood by the end of the season. So I really love the fit. I think he has superstar potential, which is something that the Rockets need. Not saying that Christian Wood doesn't have it, but I think Jalen Green has more superstar potential than Christian Wood. I just don't know if Christian Wood's ever gonna be like a superstar. But and then you mentioned one of your boys, Sengun, Garuba as well. So they kind of doubled down on big men, which makes sense considering they don't really have a ton of big men depth at the 4 and 5. So I think those were 2 great additions that are going to step in, and they're in a situation where you're going to see all these guys, even Josh Christopher, who was one of the better 3-and-D, underrated 3-and-D players in this draft class. I think you're going to see from day one, all of these guys are going to get a decent amount of run from game 1, which makes me very excited for all of these guys' development.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be excited about their future to a certain extent. They have a potential superstar, number 2 overall. I mean, Kevin Porter showed flashes of all-star ability. I think I agree that Christian Wood is maybe not a superstar, but I wouldn't be surprised if he made an all-star team or 2 in his career. So you have a potential superstar surrounded by some other all-stars. I mean, I think Sengun has all-star, superstar potential in him. Garuba is a perfect role player. This is a team that, at the very least, is very deep. When you add those 4 pieces along with, and I'm saying in the future, obviously they have John Wall right now, but when you take those 4 pieces and add them together with Kevin Porter, with Christian Wood, with Jayshawn Tate, that's 7 guys right there. And those are all, I mean, close to all-star potential players. I don't know if Christopher will get there, and I don't think Garuba's going to be a perennial all-star, but those are 7 guys that are all under the age of, 22? I mean, Christian Wood's probably the oldest one. I think he's 22 or 23 right now. So that's a lot of youth and a lot of depth. And I think there's a lot of potential there. So you mentioned, I mentioned Kelly Olynyk earlier. So we'll go over some additions and losses. They re-signed David Nwaba, who's a wing player for them, and then they signed. You mentioned big man depth was a little bit of an issue. They did bring in Daniel Tice from the Boston Celtics as well. They lost Sterling Brown, who was second in their team in games played last year, more of a role-playing guard. He went over to the Mavericks. And then Kelly Olynyk going over to the Pistons. And Olynyk had a really hot stretch at the end of the season. I know that he took me actually to a fantasy championship, but he was really good at the end of the year. And that sounds ridiculous, but he had a really hot stretch. So it was important to them. Daniel Tice, I guess the combination of Tice and Sengun is going to end up replacing Kelly Olynyk. But any notes on any of these additions or losses for him?
I mean, they pretty much, aside from signing Nwaba, their free agent, their offseason was in the draft. They are definitely one of the teams that made up any like eye-popping moves in free agency. I think pretty much losing Kelly Olynyk but getting Daniel Tice was a bit of like, not saying even swap, but they kind of cancel each other out to a point. I mean, Daniel Tice was a little bit cheaper for him. He got 4 years, 36, whereas Olynyk got 3 years, 37 from Detroit. So they saved a little bit of money by switching out Olynyk for Daniel Tice, but there was just kind of a lateral move that we kind of knew going in that free agency wasn't really going to be where they made much of a difference at all.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So there's not many points to make here. So let's go over their current depth chart right now. In the backcourt, John Wall and Kevin Porter are listed as starters. Behind those two, you have a little bit of a mix of youth and some veteran experience. DJ Augustine can run a second unit. Nwaba, who we just mentioned, can play the 2 or 3 for him. Daniel House, who's been more of a three-point specialist throughout his career than Josh Christopher, who they just drafted. So a little bit of depth there. At the 3 right now, Jalen Green is listed as the starter. And, I mean, you have to mention, too, Jalen Green just played in his first Summer League game, and he looked every piece of being a superstar. And I think the one thing, we talked about it in his prospect profile, but he played at 19 years old in the G League and played at a high level. So I don't think that his transition to being good in the NBA is going to be as long as other 19-year-olds because he's already played.
He's 100% going to be a starter day one.
Yeah, and he's the kind of guy that if I had to put my money on who would be Rookie of the Year right now, honestly, it would be Jalen Green because I think the learning curve is going to be the shortest for him. And
we're gonna talk about them soon enough, but I'd still be aboard the Cunningham thing for Rookie of the Year, but.
I don't know. I watched Jalen Green in that Summer League game, and I think that he's going to put up really big numbers because and I like his attitude, honestly. Like, he's very outwardly spoken and saying, I want to be a superstar and I want to be one of the faces of this league. And I kind of like it. He has I think he truly wants to be that. So he has a little bit of swagger to him. And to me, it doesn't come across as arrogant. It comes off as confidence that he's going to use to drive him. So one of the interesting things is at this point, when you're looking at this rotation, Jayshawn Tate's going to kind of find himself on the bench right now. He's probably going to be the 6th man after his not rookie of the year, his first team all rookie season. So that already gives them a little bit of depth. In the future, it'll probably be more Green and Porter in the backcourt once John Wall moves on in the future with Tate sliding into the lineup. But at this point, having Jayshawn Tate off the bench, I think, is going to be a big advantage for them, him leading that second unit. And then at the 4 and 5, they have Christian Wood and Daniel Tice listed as starters right now. Behind them, you have Sengun and Garuba. And you also have Kenyon Martin Jr., who was actually fairly underrated last year. He played 45 games for him last year, and he proved that he could at least be a very valuable 4 guy off the bench. So he'll definitely see some minutes for him. But, I mean, I think overall it's pretty interesting. They have a good mix of they have a lot of depth, more depth than you would think. I mean, when we mentioned those 4 first-round picks, the 3 young guys, and then you throw in Tice into the mix, you throw in Kenyon Martin Jr., you throw in DJ Augustine, who can still play coming off the bench, Daniel House, who's been a solid role player, Nwaba. This is a team that goes about 10 deep, and even though they're inexperienced and it'll probably take some time for them to gel, it's very intriguing. And even though the Rockets, it would be shocking if they made the playoffs, you can't say that they're not interesting.
Oh yeah, and this, you mentioned it. I mean, they a lot, and like I already mentioned, a lot of this is gonna rely on health. Especially now, John Wall maybe is stunting the growth of these guys a little bit.
Yeah.
Initially, but you can't argue that John Wall, if he's healthy, is not an asset. He
Right.
still can't play at a high level. John Wall, if John Wall was healthy, that he is at minimum an incredible mentor for all these young guys. Which I think is kind of the role that John Wall is looking at this point in his career. But if he's able to kind of be like that on-court mentor and is able to stay on the court, don't know if it's gonna matter too much in the long run with the growth, but at least that's what's gonna stop these guys initially off the bat from growing. But I think in the end, it's gonna be a good thing if John Wall is able to stay healthy. And it's another one where maybe he gets dealt. I mean, that contract is a little ridiculous, which is probably why he's not gone already. But I don't know. We'll talk about where we think they're gonna finish, but I don't think this is gonna be the worst team in the Western Conference next season. I think they have too much.
Yeah, I think, and another name I didn't even bring up, Eric Gordon is still technically there as well.
Disrespect. He's been
very much. He averaged 17 points. He only played 27 games last year, but he did average 17 points, and that once again just kind of highlights the depth that this team has. And you kind of started to go into it already, their prediction for next season. Yeah, I don't think that they'll finish in last either. I mean, the Thunder are going to be worse than them. Honestly, I know the Timberwolves have talent, but I still don't have enough faith in the Timberwolves. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished above the Kings, even though I think the Kings, I like the direction that they're headed. You could argue the Rockets could be higher. The reason that I would probably still have them as the second worst team in the West is just because I'm still worried about them defensively. Because when you look at last season, I mentioned how terrible they were defensively. I mean, they really didn't upgrade there anywhere. I love Garuba, and Garuba's going to be a tenacious defender at the next level. But Garuba alone is not going to make this defense much better. So, I mean, this is a team that I think is still going to struggle defensively, and that'll hold them back a little bit. But it's going to be a team that's fun to watch in the future. This is a team that has championship potential. Don't get me wrong. If they can learn how to gel as a unit, if they can add a few role players, Nwaba's a good defender, Christopher's a good defender, Garuba's a good defender. If those guys can develop defensively to make up for Christian Wood and Kevin Porter and Jalen Green not being great defensively, this is a team in the future that's going to compete for a championship within, similar to what we saw with the Hawks last season. I wouldn't be surprised if 3 years from now we see something like that.
I think you're talking about maybe 3 to 4 years down the line. You're talking about a team, assuming they keep the core guys together. I think in 3 to 4 years, you're talking about a team. Okay, now they can start making some noise in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would definitely agree. So, one of the things I've mentioned before, and I'll just end it kind of with this thought too, is I'm really excited because even, we prepped the worst 3 teams from last season, and actually I can highlight positive things about all three teams. And I think that's really encouraging. And we've talked about that several times, where when you're looking at the entire league, I don't think that there's one team that you can say, what in the world are they doing? I think every team at least has some sort of direction that they're going in right now. And I know the Thunder are going to be terrible next season, but they have all those picks and you can clearly see what they're doing. So I think it just makes the future.
Even if it's not going to lead to success, you know what they're doing at least.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it interesting in the future. I mean, they're not going to be relevant next year. They're the one team that's not interesting. But besides that, you could say all 29 teams are going to be interesting to watch. I'm not saying good, but they're intriguing, and there's going to be a lot of fun in watching them. So I think that's it for the Houston Rockets then. Now, we're going to continue next episode with the Detroit Pistons. So make sure you guys tune in for that. We appreciate you watching. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yep.